cases of Lithuania and Poland. And I'm so grateful that it's always been true that President Trump understands the threats, in that he was the first to put American troops for the first time in history in Poland to stop war criminal Putin. He sent Javelin missiles to the people of Ukraine to stop war criminal Putin's tanks, and to stop the funding of war criminal Putin. He stopped Nord Stream 2, which was so significant, as we have a president who understands peace through strength. War criminal Vladimir Putin is driven by an imperial ambition and a desire to recreate the failed Soviet empire. Our Eastern flank allies know better than anyone deterrence is the first and best line of defense against an enemy with an insatiable appetite for invasion. Airspace and maritime violations are only part of his effort to probe NATO defenses, test our unity, and undermine the institutions he despises. And Russia is not acting alone. The Kremlin is sustained by a coalition of hostile dictatorships, from the regime in Tehran, which supplies drones and weapons, to the Chinese Communist Party, which fuels Russia's rearmament, to the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, which provides artillery and manpower. These dictatorships share one goal: infiltrating and weakening free countries. Last year, I chaired a Helsinki Commission hearing on, quote, Russia's shadow war on NATO, end of quote, where we examined the spectrum of Moscow's overt and covert attacks on the Western world. These tactics have only grown more brazen and more coordinated and more insulting and more mocking, especially along the eastern flank. Reasserting deterrence and countering these capabilities is costly and requires serious challenges to be made in areas of production and procurement, but will make us more prepared and efficient. The bottom line: free countries and the free world cannot wait until a full-scale invasion is at its borders. Last month, Ranking Member Steve Cohen and I introduced the Eastern Flank Strategic Partnership Act in the House. The companion is the bipartisan bill led by Chairman Roger Wicker and Senator Jeanne Shaheen. The legislation ensures the United States treats the Eastern Flank as a priority theater, and that allies investing in their own defense receive the support they need. We want to make it unmistakably clear: America stands with the dynamic frontline partners. Their security is American security. The people of Estonia and all of Central and Eastern Europe know the price of freedom, and they understand the stakes. Putin's imperialist agenda does not stop at Ukraine. By occupying Transnistria of Moldova, by occupying, invading Georgia, and then rigging elections in the Republic of Georgia. And neither can our resolve. The sick symbiotic relationship between war criminal Putin, the Chinese Communist Party, and the murderous dictatorship of North Korea, and the regime in Tehran require deterrence in American and European theater to prevent aggression in the Indo-Pacific, as a warning to the Chinese Communist Party that there is resolve. There is broad bipartisan support to continue programs like the Baltic Security Initiative, which supplement the significant financial contributions made by Baltic allies. This initiative puts money back into American defense companies and is a great return on investment. These are model allies, are the foundation of the defense of American families and against U.S. adversaries. Thank you to the witnesses, and I look forward to your insight. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman and Chairman Wilson, for your very fine statement. At this point, we will hear testimony from our three distinguished witnesses. And we'll begin, of course, with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Estonia, Margus Tsahkna. Sir, did I say your name somewhere near correctly?
Thank you, Chairman. You said it more correctly than normally in Estonia, so thank you for that.
Well, you were recognized, and we appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge with us.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished commissioners, members of Congress, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude to you and to the entire U.S. Congress and to the American people for your steadfast and long-standing political and military support to Estonia. The United States never recognized the Soviet annexation of the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania after the Second World War. And you have been there with us every step of the way since 1991. Your unwavering support of us informs our unwavering support of Ukraine. Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine is about to enter its fourth year. President Putin's maximalist objectives have not changed. To conquer Ukraine, to dominate its near abroad, to divide the West, and to push the US out of Europe. Russia's attempts to weaken the West follow this old Soviet playbook, fostering division and fear. Russia remains convinced that it can outlast both Ukraine and the West. But President Putin has miscalculated. Ukraine has not fallen, the West has not crumbled, and our unity endures. Commissioners, Russia's war is not just about Ukraine. It is a threat to and an attack on the entire transatlantic security architecture. Estonia, like many other NATO allies, has witnessed Russia ramping up its shadow war against the West over the last couple of years. I would like to bring a couple of examples. First, on September 19th of this year, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets armed with air-to-air missiles violated Estonian and NATO airspace. The aircraft remained in our airspace for 12 minutes, flew a depth of 6 miles and across a distance of 60 miles, and were as close as 10 miles from the Estonian capital of Tallinn. 10 miles is the distance from this meeting room to Tyson's Corner in Virginia. The incursion in September was the 4th violation of our airspace this year alone, and 83rd violation since 2003. Yes, 83rd violation since 2003. Second, in August, we expelled the first secretary from the Russian embassy in Estonia for deliberately undermining our constitutional order and for sanctions violations. Third, we have seen Russian naval ships and Russian fighter aircraft escorting its shadow fleet vessels in the Baltic Sea. A very concrete incident took place on May 13, when again Russia's fighter jet violated Estonian airspace, escorting the shadow fleet vessel. Fourth, in the late 2023, Russian intelligence executed a sabotage operation in Estonia that targeted individuals and private and public property. Fifth, starting in the late 2023, Russia started sending waves of migrants to Estonia and Finnish borders, and we stopped them. Sixth, in April 2024, Russian GPS jamming of civilian air traffic forced the Finnish airline Finnair to suspend flights between the Finnish capital of Helsinki and the Estonian city of Tartu. Seventh, in May 2024, the Russian border guard unilaterally removed from the Narva River the buoys that demarcate the border between Estonia and Russia. And I know that several of you esteemed commissioners have seen the Narva River firsthand. None of these acts occurred in isolation, and similar incidents have occurred across Europe, unfortunately. Dear commissioners, the Russian threat is real, and Russian aggression knows no border or limits. We expect Russia's hybrid campaign to increase and intensify. Russia's goal is to divide the West socially and politically, and to disrupt our willingness and ability to support Ukraine. Our response must be clear. Every Russian provocation will mean a NATO more united, a West more resolute, and Ukraine more tightly interlinked with the Euro-Atlantic family. While conquering Ukraine remains Russia's top priority, Russia is successfully conducting the massive reform of its armed forces. Despite all the Russian casualties in Ukraine, the size of the Russian military is growing. One consequence of this reform will be more Russian personnel and more Russian military assets deployed to Baltic and Finnish borders. In 2016, there were some 125,000 Russian troops as close as 25 miles from the Estonian border. Our population is 1.3 million people. For scale, imagine having some 35 million hostile troops 25 miles into Canada or Mexico. Our intelligence suggests that within the next 2 to 3 years or less, Russia will return to Baltic borders with even more troops and military equipment that they had before full-scale invasion to Ukraine. Russia has also already demonstrated the ability to rapidly generate large combat-ready forces. But NATO is not standing idly by. Baltic skies are protected by a NATO air policing mission. NATO launched the Eastern Sentry and Baltic Sentry operations to better protect NATO's eastern flank. Politically, as a response to our airspace violation, NATO and United Nations Security Council sent a clear message to Russia. Its aggression against Ukraine and its provocations against the West will not succeed. Thanks to US leadership, NATO recently agreed to a historic increase of its defense spending. Estonia's core defense spending will hit 5.4% of GDP next year. Europe is expected to invest some 7 trillion in defense by 2033, including into co-production opportunities. In Estonia, we continue enhancing our border security and our military deterrence, and we continue sending at least 0.25% of GDP to Ukraine in military aid. Here I wish to thank the US Congress specifically. For the last several years, you have supported the Baltic Security Initiative. This program has accelerated the development of military capabilities such as air defense and long-range fires across the Baltic states. In 2025, for every dollar in security assistance from US, we put $21 into our defense budget, and most of it's going back to US economy. The presence of US troops on NATO's eastern front is likewise invaluable. Estonia is honored to provide your troops top-of-the-class military housing and unique training opportunities. All this makes NATO's deterrence credible. A stronger Europe is a stronger NATO, a stronger America. To conclude, we will not let Ukraine surrender to Russian aggression or let Russia dictate the terms of peace and security in Europe. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Members of Congress, I thank you for the privilege of testifying here today. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Seth Jones, we are delighted to have CSIS back with us, and you are now recognized for your testimony, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Wilson, Dr. Murphy, Mr. Elsie, and other distinguished members of the Commission. Honored to share my views on this subject, particularly returning from NATO headquarters last week and also our allies in the UK. I'd like to reflect on 3 main points in my testimony here. Happy to get to other issues in the discussion. First is that the Russian government has conducted and continues to conduct a growing campaign of sabotage and subversion against the US and Europe, designed in part to target countries, companies, and individuals that have provided support to Ukraine. What else did we need to see then within the last 24 hours? The active sabotage on the Polish rail line that brings material and has brought members of Congress into Ukraine from Poland. Just the latest example of sabotage operations likely perpetrated by the Russian state. Second, much of this campaign has been led by the main intelligence directorate, or the GRU. These attacks generally across Europe, but we've also seen the targeting of U.S. bases, collection, generally been an intelligence collection. They've included bombings, some of which I'll go into detail on, drone incursions, sabotage against undersea cables and pipelines, electronic attack, cyber operations, as well as other incidents in intelligence collection against U.S. bases in Europe. And then third, a subject that I hope we get into in some more detail is I do think the U.S. and Europe need to develop a more effective strategy that includes both defensive but also offensive measures to strengthen deterrence on NATO's eastern flank, including with our Estonian allies, but also to raise the costs on Moscow of its continuing aggression, which is a component of what it is doing in its full-scale invasion of Ukraine and its nuclear saber-rattling. So actually we see a Russian campaign that goes from irregular or sabotage operations through to a conventional full-scale invasion and nuclear saber-rattling across the conflict continuum. My government time has been in U.S. special operations, but it has been much more than those kinds of acts. I think what's interesting is not that the Russians and the Soviets before them have been involved in these activities. Much of that during the Cold War we referred to, and the Soviets referred to, as active measures. But what is new is the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but also the sheer number of activity. The minister remarked about several of them. According to our data set of Russian activity, between 2022 and 2023, the number of Russian sabotage and subversive acts in Europe quadrupled during that one-year time period, and then tripled again between 2023 and 2024. Those Russian activities, some of which we assessed were Russian government, some of them were leveraging partner forces, including elements of Russian criminal organizations or other actors in Europe, included things like explosives against companies that were housing or building material sent to Ukraine, the use of blunt instruments against undersea fiber optic cables, including as part of the Shadow Fleet, and then a range of other activities, including targeting transportation links with both cyber, but as we've seen recently also kinetic activity, bombings against key rail links. There are a range of reasons we assess the Russians are likely to do it, have been doing this, but let me just briefly note that I think there are a number of measures that there have been some helpful steps, but I would just add a few things to consider. One is, I think we have to be very careful about a decrease in the U.S. conventional footprint in Europe now. We've advocated in research of U.S. force posture. We call a 4+2 force posture with 4 brigade combat teams in Europe. I think it is important to send a message to the Russians, particularly with U.S. Army capabilities, that we are serious, and those would be important for deterrence. On offense, I will say just very briefly, I think the Russians are vulnerable on the economic sanctions, both primary and secondary, that are worth thinking about escalating. I think the Russians are also vulnerable on a much more targeted activity against their Shadow Fleet, of which there is intelligence about. And then finally, a need to continue providing assistance to Ukraine. For a range of these reasons, I think Russia can be deterred, but I do think the U.S. needs to play an important role. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back.
Well, thank you very, very much. And we now recognize Mr. Peter Rue. And do I have that pronunciation correct?
You can call me whatever you like, Senator Wicker. Peter Rao is the
Rao,
conventional
okay.
pronunciation.
Very good. Sometimes if I get it right, 50% of the time, I feel like I'm batting 500. You're
Chairman,
recognized, and we are thrilled to have you here.
You got my name right, Mr. Chairman.
All right, yes. I struggled, and I did practice all evening last night.
Chairman Wicker, Co-Chairman Wilson, and distinguished members of the Commission, thank you for this opportunity. The views I express in my testimony, which I will now summarize, are my own and should not be construed as representing an official position of Hudson Institute. As the minister pointed out, and as Dr. Jones elucidated, Russia is prosecuting a campaign of hybrid warfare against NATO. Putin has complemented this campaign with nuclear threats to gradually tilt the security environment between Russia and NATO in Moscow's favor. Russia's intention is to stress the alliance and exacerbate divisions between allies and within nations. The Kremlin brackets these actions with persistent information operations. To put it directly, Russia is undertaking a comprehensive campaign of political warfare designed to weaken the West. There is near consensus in the analytical community that as long as Russia struggles to take territory in Ukraine, it cannot afford a broader war with NATO. While this judgment is almost certainly correct, it risks lulling the West into a false sense of security. Because Russia is an offensive and revisionist power, while NATO is a defensive alliance, Moscow has the advantage of choosing both the time and place of any potential confrontation. The salient point is that while the overall military balance favors NATO by a significant margin, the balance of forces in some parts of Eastern Europe may favor Russia in a blitz scenario. So what is to be done? U.S. forces are the backbone of deterrence in Europe, and U.S. commanders have testified that permanently stationed troops are invaluable for learning the local terrain and improving interoperability with allies. And yet, until it established U.S. Land Forces 5th Corps Forward Command at Poznan, Poland in 2023, the U.S. had no permanent force presence in the new member states of NATO, in deference to the NATO-Russia Founding Act of 1997. That political agreement with Russia lost all meaning with Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. To counter whatever misperceptions may arise from the recent U.S. decision to pull an infantry brigade back to Fort Campbell, U.S. planners may wish to consider turning a rotational presence into a permanent force in Eastern Europe. Given its strategic location near the port of Constanța on the Black Sea, Romania is transforming Mihail Cognițianu into one of the largest NATO bases in Europe. As a keynote in Europe's security architecture, the base could serve as the ideal host for a modestly sized permanent U.S. garrison. Even so, adopting a purely defensive posture against Russia is unwise, as Seth Jones elucidated. For the Kremlin, bribing the captains of cargo ships to drag their rusty anchors across the Baltic seabed to cut critical cables would cost a mere pittance. The total cost to Russia of launching its recent drone salvo into Poland totaled no more than a few $100,000. As a first step, therefore, NATO's political leaders may wish to change the Kremlin's cost-benefit calculus by tasking commanders to reassess the rules of engagement for the alliance's Baltic air policing mission. Such a directive would at the very least get Moscow's attention. NATO could also tie Russian violations of Allied airspace to Russian positions abroad. Ukrainian special forces have already targeted Wagner Group operators in Africa, from Mali to Sudan. The West could make clear to Moscow that it would encourage and facilitate similar operations against Russia's Africa Corps, jeopardizing a lucrative Russian market, should the violations of Allied airspace continue. Alternatively, every violation of Allied territory by a Russian UAV could be met with the transfer of a commensurate number of cruise or ballistic missiles to Ukraine, whether it's the Swedish-German Taurus or the U.S. Army Tactical Missile System. Furthermore, while the U.S. and Europe cannot order Moscow to repair damaged infrastructure at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, it can make clear that it will exact a commensurate cost for Russian sabotage. Moscow still earns hundreds of millions of dollars every day in oil sales. The U.S. is eminently capable of metering its sanctions to mirror Russian actions against critical infrastructure. At the conventional level, to ensure that NATO can execute the family of plans ratified at the Vilnius summit in 2023, NATO's political leadership may wish to empower and encourage SACEUR to test the force through regular SNAP exercises, in addition to the alliance's pre-planned exercises. This would simulate high-pressure conditions and could identify shortcomings and capabilities, while training the alliance to move quickly in an emergency setting. It is far better to strain the NATO force model in peacetime than it would be in wartime. Finally, this past week has proven very difficult for Ukraine, from military setbacks in Pokrovsk to corruption allegations in Kyiv. I'd like to close by reiterating that it remains in the American and European interest to empower Ukraine in its fight for survival. Thankfully, the first billions of dollars in European commitments have served as proof of concept for the Pearl system. As more European countries participate in this arrangement, the program is only likely to grow. It is an honor to testify before you today. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much. And the fact that my phone rang gives me an opportunity to remind everyone to silence all electronic devices. Let me begin by you, Mr. Minister. How long have you been in various public offices in your country?
I've been serving on the government level, the cabinet member as a Minister of Social Affairs, Minister of Defense, and now Minister of Foreign Affairs. Altogether, I can say maybe like 6 years, but I've been in the public sector as a representative as well since 2007. So it has been a pretty long time.
So you know your people pretty well. Is there any sentimentality in Estonia to go back to the days of the Soviet rule?
That is zero sentimentality because of our history. During the Soviet occupation, we lost every fifth of Estonian. And all these stories are still in our families. We know exactly what happened with killings, with deportations, with escaping from the country. And unfortunately, we see exactly the same things happening in 21st century by Russia in Ukraine.
And you are very close to your neighbors in Latvia and Lithuania, both physically and also philosophically. Would that be correct to say?
It is correct.
What percentage of the population in Estonia are principally Russian-speaking?
We have close to 30% of Russian-speaking minority.
And about the same in Latvia, would that be correct?
In Latvia, a bit more, but the scale is the same.
And Russian speakers, a high percentage also in Lithuania, is that correct?
Historically, Lithuania had less forced immigration during the Soviet times, so they have less than 10%.
I'll ask you a leading question. What is your opinion of the absurd assertion of some people in the United States that because residents of other countries speak Russian, they identify themselves more as people desiring to be ruled by Russia?
Our experience is that these people, Russian-speaking people who are living in Estonia, they know even better than we how the life in Russia looks like, without freedom, under the terror, and also the threat. So I can say that most of these people, they don't want to have Russia back to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. But of course, it depends on the generations as well, because the older people normally remember the good old times when they had special rights during the Soviet occupation. But I can say that based on our study and also experience, we have had cases when Russian citizens who are living in Estonia, they're traveling to Russia, and also some of them they have sent to Ukraine, and they're dead. So they know exactly what Russia means.
Mr. Rao and Mr. Jones, imagine, if you will, a young couple in their 30s sitting around in Camden, South Carolina, or perhaps in Corinth, Mississippi, just starting out, a couple of kids, working hard, both of them in jobs, trying to make ends meet and deal with the challenges of youth and a family. What's it to them whether Ukraine or the Baltic nations are overtaken by a Russian dictator? What does it matter to them? What's their stake?
Well, Senator, thank you for that question. I would argue that the peace and stability of Europe has long been directly connected to peace and prosperity in the United States. Some 2/3 of global foreign direct investment is transatlantic. Something like 46 of 50 U.S. states trade more with Europe than they do with China. This is by far the most intense and closely knit economic environment you will find anywhere in the world. And I interpret Russia's attack on Ukraine, including all of the hybrid operations in Ukraine's near abroad, as Russia's, if not opening now, I would say almost decades-long attack on the European security order. So this impacts thousands of jobs. It impacts huge amounts of investment. And if European security begins to crumble, so will some of the economic well-being we have here in the United States.
Mr. Jones, same question, and I might add to that. What is that couple's stake, or those couples' stake, in the validity and sanctity of our country's solemn word when we give a promise?
Well, I think we have committed as part of a NATO member to protect democracy in our own country, but also certainly in others as well that we have formal alliances with. You know, it was interesting, on trips to Japan, Korea, and Taiwan recently, all three of them, senior leadership of all three countries, said what happens in Ukraine and on the Eastern Front has a significant effect on our security. How do we trust the U.S. going forward if they were to abandon an allies in other places? I would also highlight something that is much bigger than just Russia itself, which is, as we have seen since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started, there has been significant Chinese assistance into Russia, North Korean assistance, including North Korean soldiers, and Iranian assistance, including Shahed industrial capacity in areas like Yelabuga. So Americans in 1939 wondered, why should we care about a Nazi Germany that was invading Poland and then continued into Belgium and then eventually into France? I think we've got a revanchist Russia and others as well. I think there is a lot to be concerned about.
So if I'm 100% in my little household, America first, I still have a stake in what is going on in the Baltic.
Absolutely. I think I am America first, but not
So am
America
I.
only.
Thank you very much. Chairman Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Wicker. And indeed, it's an honor to be with each of you. And Foreign Minister Tsahkna, it's just, it's so encouraging of the success of Estonia. My visit there, as I mentioned to you, to be on the banks of the Narva River, and the chairman, again, was ahead of the curve. People may speak Russian, but they don't want to be part of Russia. They want to be part of Estonia. And we've already heard in 1939 what German-speaking people, these recognition of Sudetenland, that Hitler had the same plan, and that's why we need to be strong. With that in mind, indeed, Foreign Minister, I want you to know that unity has indeed not crumbled. It's been really reaffirmed, and I'm associate member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and it's just so exciting to me to see NATO standing together and no wavering. It's just incredible. And then I'm also grateful to be the co-founder and co-chair of the European Union Caucus. Again, who would imagine the unity there? And the consequence of that is that one of the most recent studies I've seen is that in terms of per capita investments to assist the people of Ukraine, the United States has come in 17th per capita GDP. And so it's really clear indeed the excess over our providing of aid to any to our European allies, and so it's just so positive. And then I'm really grateful that indeed President Trump has recognized this in the past by putting American troops for the first time in Poland, by providing the Javelin missiles to the people of Ukraine to try to avoid this war in the first place, and then to stop Nord Stream 2, the funding of war criminal Putin. With that in mind, where we are is at what point should NATO shift to default air defense rules of engagement, including pre-delegated authority to shoot down hostile drones immediately? What are the operational risks of remaining under peacetime rules?
Thank you. Thank you about this question. This is a not only like practical question, it is actually going back to the history, and also I see it unfortunately today. This is something that President Putin is using very well. It's a fear. It's a fear of escalation, which is actually isolating sometimes our way of thinking, what is really happening. So President Putin is using the fear against us. And every time when Russia has more pressure on, he's going to talk about escalation. He's still going to talk about nuclear deterrence, and then the western part of the world will be frozen. And I can say you that in our region, we don't believe in that. And that's why we say as well that the red lines policy, in the meaning of NATO, must be very clear. If there is a violation of the airspace and we see the direct military threat to the NATO member state, we should use the force. And as well, it was asked after we called the United Nations Security Council meeting about this. It was in September when this high-level United Nations General Assembly week started. And later on as well, the same question was asked from President Trump, and he said very clearly that on the question that if you need to shoot the planes down, it was correct. We need to shoot them down if there is a threat. So I think that we have everything in place. We just need to understand that Putin understands exactly this language. He's pushing us, and if we are hesitating, if we are based on the fear, then he is pushing forward again and again. We see it since 2007, when actually President Putin published his plan during the Munich Security Conference. And he was very clear that his goal is to eliminate the root causes. And root causes for him is the collapse of Soviet Union. 2008, we saw invasion to Georgia, and 20% of the territory is still occupied. 2014, Ukraine war started, and response was not there. 2022 as well, we have full-scale war in Europe. So in that regard, why I'm too long, what I want to say is that we see very close to Russia that we must be very clear, no fear. If there is a need to use the force, we'll need to do it. And then the red lines are settled. Thank you.
And again, thank you. And my time is up. And actually, I just want to commend President Jones. We're so grateful for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, what that means. And as we have people around our Eastern European allies observing what we're saying today, they know to call on President Jones. And then Director Rao, thank you so much. The Hudson Institute, how fantastic it is. And a point I want to make, you mentioned Constanta. I was 28 years ago visiting Cluj-Napoca in Romania to recognize a sister city relationship with Columbia, South Carolina. And at that time, somebody said, hey, one day we dream that American ships will be coming to and docking at Constanta. Well, it came true 10 years later, not some far off. So how far? And then, but additionally, 28 years ago, I visited Chelyabinsk in Russia, where it was a sister city program put together, and it was so impressive to me. See our shared culture of art, literature, architecture, arts in every way, music, and my hopes for a free and independent Russia have been doomed by war criminal Putin. But the people of Russia, I'm just hoping one day they too will have the opportunities the people have of the eastern flank of NATO. I yield back.
Thank you. And now the chair recognizes Representative Steve Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses. I apologize for being a little late. This is the most important subject. I visited Narva, and you can visually see the city of Narva, the area, and it is so Russian in terms of stark architecture that is typical Soviet, and the expressions on the people's faces are those of people who don't seem to be happy campers. Unlike in Estonia, the rest of Estonia. And I'm happy to see you, sir. You have one of the most attractive leadership groups in the world, and nice that they chose a minority to send here. I enjoyed my visit to Estonia, I always have. There's nothing changed since...
I think the minister is a very handsome man.
I concur with the chair. But he's in a league of his own. 1939 and today are no different. The attitude of Putin and Stalin are no different. It's Russia, 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 Soviet Union, Soviet Union, Soviet Union. And that has not stopped, and that's what drives Putin, and it's driven him since he was KGB in Germany and saw the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was awful to him, and he's never forgotten that. Politicians should sometimes forget old problems and go on to new problems. Sometimes they can't get over old problems, and they get into repeating errors of the past. We're going to have in Lithuania Latvia and Estonia are going to have problems with Russia. They would love to have you back in the Soviet Union. We need to act strongly. I know President Trump has had mixed postures toward Russia. What he did in Helsinki was sinful. What he did in Alaska was almost as sinful. To welcome him to our country, to roll out the red carpet, to genuflect, to have our troops honor him when he just came as a charade. He never came to Alaska with any idea of working towards a peace agreement. He doesn't want peace. He wants to take over Ukraine. He'd like to kill Zelensky. And he'd like to go into the other countries in Eastern Europe, and he will do that. Russia has a lot of significant and lethal military equipment on a scale comparable to ours and China's, and maybe in some cases surpassing it. And they didn't do that to win the science fair. They wanted to come after us and our Eastern European friends. And our president must understand that and strengthen our resolve to help our Eastern European allies, because that is being America first. They will come after us eventually. They want world domination. The planes that they have, the missiles that they've got that can stay in flight for interminable amounts of time are not necessarily intended for the Baltic countries. It's intended for the United States. There's no need for those missiles if they were just interested in Poland and Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia and other countries in Eastern Europe. They're after us. And we need to be prepared for it, and we need to fight, know that Ukraine is fighting the war for us now. And they need more defensive weapons, and they need more authority to attack Russia and bring the fight to the Russians. That's the only way we can stop them. Putin only knows power. To retreat from him, as we did in Helsinki and as we did in Alaska, was wrong. It only strengthens him. So I hope that we get bolder and we understand the importance of what's happening in Ukraine and what would happen in the Baltic states if Ukraine is not successful in fending off the Russians. Thank you for your country's strength and for its desire for democracy, which all people should yearn for. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Representative Cohen. Senator Bozeman, I'm going to give you a minute to collect your thoughts here and recognize Mr. Jake Elsie of Amarillo, Texas. Representative Elsie is a Navy veteran, fighter pilot, and a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, and we welcome him to the commission. You're recognized for a question, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate being here. It's actually the thrill of a lifetime as I studied growing up about the Helsinki Commission and the work that they do for world peace. I'm just privileged to be a part of this now with so many friends and to see you all here today. Vladimir Putin is not a president. He's a dictator, and he's a czar. And what we have to understand is these four dictators that very much reflect what occurred in 1939 are now stronger because of the invasion of Ukraine, not weaker. They have gotten together on economic, industrial, and defense cooperation, and that has increased amongst all four. So if anybody is deluding themselves into thinking this is about Russia and the Baltics or Russia and the Nordics, it is not. And what troubles me about some of the discussion that we have in the media, not here today, but the discussion, and I guess it's the accepted term now, is hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare is one of those terms that really makes it antiseptic and as if there's no victims, as if there's no damage, there's no deaths, there's no destruction. We, in 1999, learned that the Chinese are using unrestricted warfare in their aims for the South China Sea and beyond. We need to call this for what this is, as it's unrestricted warfare in all the ways that they're doing it, to include killing people in foreign nations. That is an act of war. So many ways that they're doing that. So I think we should start calling it unrestricted, but I'm pleased with what I'm seeing from NATO. the responses that we've had from time to time, we have kind of tried to find our way on this. I think we need to continue to send the signal that we are going to send permanent troops into Europe to defend them, because Vladimir Putin is the orc. He's the ultimate orc. As a fan of Lord of the Rings, John 10:10 says the enemy kills, steals, and destroys. Tell me what Russia builds, what they improve. They improve nothing. They build nothing. They kill, steal, and destroy. And they're probing the Baltics and they're probing the Nordics right now to see if there's going to be a response. And up until now, there has been no cost for anything they've done. So I'm proud to say that President Trump said, shoot them down. And I'm a proponent of that myself. So, Peter, I'm going to ask you a question, put you on the spot. In 1994, we had the Budapest Memorandum, which said Russia's not going to invade and we will be there to protect Ukraine. Different president. In 1997, we had the Founding Act. Different president, different czar in Russia. Can we just count those as not being in effect anymore?
First of all, Congressman, thank you for your service, and thank you for your leadership on national security issues since the moment you've entered Congress. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and watching you at work. I think the NATO-Russia Founding Act is totally obsolete, and I don't think the United States should feel bound by it at all. It's essentially been torn up by the Russians, and if one reads the language of the act, it has been totally violated by the Russian Federation. And I agree 100% that the Russians understand strength and strength alone. And to connect it to Chairman Wilson's remarks, remember in 2015 in November, the Turks shot down a Sukhoi Su-24, and ever since, the Russians have not violated Turkish airspace once. Now, we shouldn't, I think, act brazenly. These are MiG-31s that violated Estonian airspace, certified with dual-use nuclear-capable Kinzhal missiles. But nonetheless, at least looking at rules of engagement, I think, is a way to flip that cost-benefit calculus for the Russians and make them think twice about violating airspace for 10 minutes, which is a level of audacity that has to go challenged.
When we talk about, thank you, when we talk about these nations, the Baltics and the Nordics, we're talking about 10 million people total, 1.3 million people in Estonia. They're not that big. So they are, as they are in Taiwan and as they are in Israel, they are surrounded by enemies that are only minutes away. So do you have the capacity right now? Do you have everything you need to defend yourself in case this incursion comes again? And through Article 4, we have now said it's time to knock one down.
First of all, the Nordic Baltics economy together belongs to the G10 economies. And actually, Nordic Baltics economy is together exactly the same size as Russia. If you're adding Poland, it's 150% of Russian economy. So economically, we are very powerful. Now, if you're asking the question about military capabilities, of course, we have our own capabilities, but we are committed to NATO, and also we have agreed the NATO defense plans regionally. And they are good plans, actually. Since 2 years ago in Vilnius, we agreed the new defense plans. There are gaps we need to fulfill, and that's the reason why we're now increasing heavily the investments to defense. Of course, we have capabilities to fight back, but if we are talking about the full-scale invasion from Russia, so we need full NATO. We need as well the US commitment there, and that's why the NATO unity is most important. Thank you.
Senator, my time's up. It's an honor to be sitting at this table with you and these other distinguished members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I recognize Representative Murphy of North Carolina. In addition to being a representative, Dr. Murphy is a urologist and has been a missionary in both India and Haiti. And so we welcome you to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And as with Representative Elsie, I'm honored to be part of this august group. We sat together as a unified body, House and Senate, a few years ago before this monstrosity ever occurred. We were with the Chief of Staff, Armed Chiefs of Staff. We were with Defense Secretaries, and we sat and we looked on the wall and we saw how Ukraine was bordered by three sides by Russian troops, and we did nothing. We didn't arm Ukraine. We didn't want to, quote, poke the bear. I pray that if the same thing happens with the Baltics, we'll have the fortitude that we don't wait for an action, that we prevent the action by arming the people, by coming up and not fighting a defensive war. It's so much that inaction led to a lot of action by Putin. I pray we don't make that same mistake again. And I think a lot of the things that, sadly enough, occurred in Afghanistan have led to the debacle today, led to the loss of 1 million lives that should have never happened. So if that ever happens, God forbid, I pray that who's ever in the administration to this point, to that point, prevents that from happening. I will ask this, is there any public campaign within Estonia now, or any of the Latvian states, that is anti-Putin? Is it all just fear of what's going to occur, or is there any anti-Putin campaign?
Thank you for these remarks. First of all, I would like to commend the first part is that we agreed in Vilnius 2 years ago the new NATO defense plans, and they were exactly based on the experience what we see now in Ukraine. And of course, you can imagine that for Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, we have a territorial depth like 200 kilometers. And the idea before was that, of course, if Russia will be aggressive and invade NATO and the Baltic states, then finally, of course, NATO will win the war victoriously. But the sad thing is that taking back the territories, there will be no Estonians, no Latvians, no Lithuanians left. So that's why we changed this strategy and also the plans. They are very good plans. But Russia must know as well, and they know, of course, that if deterrence is not working, and I do hope that it will work, but if it's not working in the future, we will be ready from the first second to hit into the heart of Russia and take down all the targets which are supporting this kind of aggression. And this is exactly why we are now investing heavily to our defense capabilities regionally, but of course together with NATO and also with allies as US. So this is the understanding. And why I'm talking about this is that actually people of Estonia, we are not afraid of Russia. We don't fear. We have no fear. We have been living there 10,000 years, and we have planned to continue for the same long time. And we just know what may come. This is a big difference. If you know what may come, then you're not afraid. You're just preparing for that. We are very practical. So that's why we decided in the beginning of 1991, after regaining our independence, two things. First, we fight back this time. We didn't do it in 1940 and 39. And the second, that we never be alone again, because at this time we declared that we are a neutral, peace-loving country. But actually, Stalin and Hitler, they didn't care about that. So we didn't fight back, and we were alone. We wanted to get good relations with Moscow, with Berlin, with Paris, London, and Washington at this time. But now we made our choice. Never be alone again, and we definitely fight back. And Russia should know that, whatever it costs. And it's not based on fear. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rao, let me ask a question. Getting into the mind of Putin, getting into the mind of Stalin, the other despots that we've seen in the world, how do you change that man's mind? Because I would submit that while many criticize the president for trying to do what he did, he tried to give him an out. I don't know. That's not my understanding. I would just love to know, how do we give Putin an out to back out? Because he's not going to do it, seemingly not going to do it on its own. Interested in your thoughts.
There was a wonderful description of Putin in the early days after the full-scale invasion, reported in I think it was the Financial Times, where a reporter asked a senior Kremlin source close to the president who President Putin was relying on to go to war, who he was listening to, and he said he had his two primary advisors, Ivan the Terrible and Catherine the Great. So there is, I think, an imperial quality to President Putin, and we've seen it on display in the now famous, infamous interview he did with Tucker Carlson, where he went off on a long historical soliloquy. The reports out of the meeting in Alaska are similar, where apparently President Putin began with a lengthy historical excursion, talking about Yaroslav the Wise and other figures of Russian imperial past. And so there is sort of a grandiloquence, a sense of historical boasting that is, I think, at the core of Putin. But beyond that kind of ideological tenor, I do think he responds to basic cost-benefit analysis. And if the pain and suffering imposed on the Russian people is sufficient to threaten the political foundations of his rule, he may be forced to reconsider and come to the table. And I think both the Pearl system of weapons support, financed by the Europeans to Ukraine, and the recently announced Rosneft and Lukoil sanctions, which take effect on the 21st of this month, so just in a few days, are both the military and economic prongs of an attempt to change the Russian calculus. Because to date, the president has sought to engage President Putin and President Zelensky. He sought to act as a mediator, bending in his kind of neutrality and mediation towards the Ukrainians, but nonetheless to mediate. And since I think he's been frustrated by Russian obstruction, by Russian inflexibility, he's now trying to change the calculations of the Russians by applying some pressure. And we'll see, as President Trump put it, when President Putin, or maybe it was Lavrov, the Kremlin spokesperson, scoffed at the sanctions announcement. We'll see if he's still laughing in 6 months.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Senator Bozeman can also be called Dr. Bozeman. He's not only a foreign policy expert, having actually lived in Europe for a time when his father was assigned over there, but also he's in charge of agriculture policy over on this side of the Capitol, and he's mighty busy. But, John, we appreciate you showing up today and lending your expertise to this important subject. So, Senator John Bozeman.
No, thank you so much, and it's so good to be with you all and to have such a distinguished panel to come and tell us what we need to be doing. And I thought it was interesting, I think we all know that the airspace incursions are a method of destabilizing our countries and collecting intelligence. List goes on and on. Congressman Ellzey suggested that we shoot them down. President Trump has. I think if you polled the panel here, you'd probably find a bunch of people that would be in that camp. But the reality is besides doing that, you've got all the other stuff that's going on, the cyber war that's taking place, the disrupting our elections, arsons, assassinations, the list goes on and on. So if you do, take out one, you've still got the others to deal with. You mentioned the sanctions. And I guess what I'm asking is what do we feel like is the best, most comprehensive way to deal with this? How do you make it such that the Russians actually feel, a response from a unified West that actually does help us hurt them?
Thank you. But first of all, I would like to thank Senator Bozeman. I was 2 years ago in Arkansas, and this is a good example that we actually bought the HIMARS systems from Arkansas, and also this is a good example how the Baltic Security Initiative added as well value from Estonia is going back to U.S. industry, and now these HIMARSs are working well in Estonia already. So thank you for that cooperation. But yes, what we need to do what we need to do. It means as well what we need to increase our capabilities. We need to actually be committed to our plans. First of all, invest money and the military capabilities. But the problem is aggressor. The problem is Putin. And the only way out is the peace through strength. It means as well increasing heavily the pressure on Russia. We have put on already the 19 packages of sanctions from European Union side. The 20th is already preparing. So we are ready, very close to make decisions to use the Russian frozen assets. We're talking about more than 200 billion euros, which is frozen in Europe. And Estonia has been pushing this process already close to 3 years. And now we see the political willingness to do it in Europe. I do hope that it will happen in December. As well, the European Union has a leverage and opportunity to put tariffs on export from Russia and Belarus to Europe, mainly about energy, which doesn't need consensus. You know, probably our complexity about European Union, about sanctions, we need consensus, 27 countries. But about tariffs, we need the qualified majority, and it's proposed by European Commission. It will hit heavily. So as well, we are very much welcoming the President Trump's decisions on putting sanctions on two the largest energy companies, as well the secondary sanctions. I do hope that the Senate will and also Congress will support these sanction regime, the secondary sanctions mainly, because they are hitting these countries and governments which are dealing with Russia. So I was in a visit to China just last week. It was very interesting. Of course, probably I couldn't change the global foreign policy goals of China, but I was very clear as well. And I asked the question that China is the main enabler for Russia to wage the war. Main economical supporter, but as well we are talking about at least the dual-use technologies which has been given to Russia. And so what we need to do together with US and so on, together with Europe, is that to improve and also to increase the pressure to China to buy less gas and oil from Russia, because Putin's and Russian economy is not doing well. They are not doing well. As well, Russia has not had any kind of strategic breakthrough on the battlefield in Ukraine. Whatever Putin wants to tell, instead of 6 days special operation, he's waging more than 3 years of full-scale war without any strategic breakthrough. So that's why we need to act to support Ukraine, but at the same time put more pressure on Russia. This is the only way, and I hope that we are going together on that direction. Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Just to add on the Russian challenges, it's not just that the Russians surpassed 1 million casualties over the course of the summer, which is extraordinary, and it's not just that the Russians, the average rate of advance is slower than during the Somme, during World War I, but it's also that if you start the Soviet campaign at Operation Barbarossa when the Germans invaded, and you fast forward 3 years and 9 months, they were in Berlin. Today, if you fast forward that same amount of time from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, they're in Pokrovsk. It is a shell of the Soviet Union. I would add that the Russians are vulnerable on the economy, and I think that is an area where that we can exploit. I agree, they're grappling with inflation, labor shortages, brain drain. I think increased sanctions would be very difficult for President Putin. I also think, and I would just add one other area, is a much more targeted effort at identifying and then trying to shut down elements of the shadow fleet, including sanctions against some of the flag vessels that are illegally shipping Russian oil and gas. There are other elements of that, including listing and sanctioning insurers that are providing insurance to the shadow fleet ecosystem. So sanctions and I think a couple of other steps, including the shadow fleet, will start to put a dent in the Russian economy, which is not doing anywhere near as well as Vladimir Putin would hope, and certainly not as well as he's telling his own population.
Thank you. Further questions, Senator Bozeman?
Do you want to?
Sure, I'm happy to add to that. I would just say that there are, I think, symmetrical responses available to the United States and to NATO when it comes to cyber aggression. President Trump has shown in 2018 by shutting down reportedly the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg that we can punch back in that domain. Maybe it's time for the lights to go off in the Moscow metro for a morning for them to get the message that they can't undertake similar attacks in the West. Maybe it's time to facilitate, encourage, support Ukrainian special operations against Russian positions in Africa if they sabotage us in Europe. Maybe it is time to dial up the sanctions in certain areas to essentially fund or pay for or force the Russians to feel the pain from their own critical infrastructure attacks in the Baltic Sea. And I would add on the economic sanctions front, while I'm not an economic determinist, I'm not a Marxist, I do think that the pain is real. On Friday, the Russian Statistical Agency reported essentially stagnant growth, 0.6% GDP growth in the third quarter over a year ago. Their inflation has decreased a little bit, still hovering around 8%. And I think on October 24th, the last rate cut was to 16.5% in the key base rate in the Russian system, which makes borrowing costs incredibly painful for Russian businesses. Inflation's a problem, economic growth is stagnant, high borrowing costs, and now there's talk, according to the Russian Finance Ministry, of a VAT increase from 20 to 22% next year, which shows that the National Wealth Fund is beginning, the liquid portion is beginning to run dry, and they have a big budget deficit that is yawning and on the horizon. So I think the Rosneft and Lukoil sanctions, which takes about half of Russian crude oil production into attack, will begin to really shape at the end of this week and beyond. And already, just to take one example where this has positive follow-on effects for the United States, the port of Burgas in Bulgaria, which processes about 140,000 barrels of crude oil per day, is now being taken in receivership by the Bulgarian government. It's a Lukoil asset. And instead, the U.S. is forging, through the 3+1 ministerial, I think just this week in Athens, a new vertical corridor energy partnership where American LNG from Athens through Bulgaria up through Romania, Moldova, can go to Ukraine to help deal with some of their natural gas shortages. We are pushing out, in some respects, the Russian energy dominance of this part of the world, and we'll be able to replace it, I think, with the U.S. system, and that's in our national interest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll take another round if you gentlemen can stay with us. To what extent does the average person in Moscow or St. Petersburg, the population centers, hear our point of view? What are their sources? We have testimony that the economy is in the tank, and people realize the economy is bad there. To what extent do they blame the war and Putin for getting them into the war? And then if you anybody would also like to talk about the legislation that would sanction Russia in terms of actually being an international terrorist nation because of the abduction of children. So who would like to start first? Mr. Tsahkna, yes.
Tsahkna, yes. This is it took a couple of years in Estonia to study my language, my family name. Thank you. But we don't know in adequate ways what Russian people are thinking, because it's not even the question about the surveys, which is pretty impossible to make in Russia, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but people are under constant terror, and they are not able to answer the questions in honest ways. So we are talking about the society which is living under constant terror, and if you think about that the Russian war against Ukraine is a bad thing, there will be punishments. People are sitting in prison. So it's hard to say what Russian people are thinking in scientific ways, but it's as a consequence of a terror regime. So the second point is that we have declared as Estonia that Russia is a terroristic country, and also for us, no problem to follow the legislation as well based on this criteria. So, and also as well, accountability is at the same time very important topic. We are talking mainly about what is happening on the battlefield and what is happening with territories, but as well, under the Council of Europe, we have called the initiative, which is the special tribunal about the aggression crimes of Russia. And this tribunal must be put in force. And Estonia will join one of the first countries with this. We sent this legislation already to our Estonian parliament to join that. It was exactly the last time we did something like this in the world was Nuremberg special tribunal about the Nazi crimes. Unfortunately, communistic crimes never have had this kind of tribunal, and this is actually, I think, one of the core reasons why Russia continuously, repeatedly violating everything and acting as an imperialistic nation, because this kind of tribunal has never happened from the past, and now it's a time to commit that. Thank you.
Every week, every month, and certainly every year since the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian state has become even more authoritarian, even more concerned about stability, and even more concerned about the views of its population. I think the answer is clear. Russian citizens do not have access to information. It's a state-controlled media, state-controlled internet. I do not think, in general, the population understands what has gone on. I don't think there's a general sense of the sheer casualties that the Russian state has, that Russian soldiers have suffered.
Let me interrupt you there. President Zelensky, in a conversation that I was part of just a few days ago, said there were over 50,000 Russian fatalities in the month of September this year. Not casualties, but 50,000 fatalities in their military force. Surely that word is getting back to the mothers and fathers and husbands and wives.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, one of the challenges has been that most of the individuals recruited into the Russian military have not been serving. They're not been the sons, certainly not the daughters, but not the sons of politically important people in Moscow or St. Petersburg. They're from Central Asia or Siberia or other locations. And clearly, Vladimir Putin does not care about casualties from huge chunks of his population.
Does public opinion matter in Russia?
I think as long as there is a significant element of fear among the population, people are not going to rise up against the government that Vladimir Putin has right now. And there is tremendous fear right now.
Well, I did interrupt your train of thought there. If you'd like to complete your statement, I'd be happy to do that.
Just that the Russian state under Vladimir Putin, since the war, full-scale war began, it was already going in this direction anyway. He's become increasingly repressive. So his population is not getting accurate information about the state of the war. They continue to blame NATO for A, how it started, and B, NATO assistance. And that, I think that is an interesting question about whether we have effectively penetrated Russian news media. I will just remind everyone that it was President Reagan, for example, in Poland during the Cold War that authorized an incredible program to provide assistance to Poles and support solidarity. So are we doing the same right now?
Mr. Rao.
I would just note that in the 2010s, President Putin built up a pretty significant domestic repression apparatus after Russians took to the streets following a questionable presidential election. And I think that very effective repressive mechanism mingles with a certain apathy of Muscovites who look at, as Seth Jones put it, sort of Dagestanis dying in Ukraine and think to themselves, so long as it doesn't affect me and my immediate kin, I'm okay with this. So I don't detect the same sort of churn, the writhing and chafing that we saw in Berlin in 1953, Budapest 1956, Prague 1968, right now in Russia. I do think, though, that returning to the United States, the issue of the abducted children, which is just a horrific and cruel and terrible act of aggression against the Ukrainian peoples, has seized the attention of a lot of Americans. And when advocates for the Ukrainian cause tend to travel outside of the Beltway and speak about this, many Americans that are unaware of it are really gripped by it. And to connect to your opening question, Senator, about what does someone in Corinth, Mississippi care about what happens in Ukraine, I think this really does offend the conscience of Americans, even if Ukraine is considered a place far away, not to mention that they are backed by some of the most odious dictatorships in the world, whether it be the People's Republic of China, the autarkic, essentially concentration camp that is modern-day North Korea, and then the Islamic Republic of Iran. So from the First Lady down to the average American, this is an issue that I think has gripped them, and it's an opportunity to demonstrate.
It's my understanding that Pope Leo will be addressing this issue in Rome within a matter of days.
That wouldn't surprise me, Senator, if I could just add one more point. I think the threat to Putin comes not from sort of the cosmopolitan artist class of St. Petersburg, but really from his hardened fascist right flank, which will argue you were correct to go to war, Mr. President, but you've been weak in how you've executed it, because it has been such a bungling effort for the Russian armed forces. So to the extent that there is opposition, we see some of it in these social media telegram channels where there's been criticism of the leadership.
To what extent do we need to be worried about what is happening in Pokrovsk?
I think the situation in Pokrovsk is difficult, if not dire. I think it's very important that the Ukrainians learn the lessons of Bakhmut and Avdiivka and ensure that their personnel is able to leave pockets that seem to be, according to the public reporting and open source intelligence, closing. But I would note that Pokrovsk is not the final gate protecting Ukraine proper. There are other very important fortified cities as part of this fortress belt that Ukraine's established in Donetsk. And so it is one very important battle. I think it matters as much at the political, sort of symbolic level as it does at the actual military tactical level. And for that reason, it's garnered a lot of attention, but I wouldn't say it's determinative.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, thank all of you for being here today. And indeed, Foreign Minister, I think you're so correct and to hear the resolve of the people of Estonia to resist whatever may occur. And it is ironic that we're here with the Helsinki Commission, okay? We can think back to the Finnish population, the bravery of the Winter War of 1939. A tiny little former Russian province comes back and defeats and resists the Soviet Union successfully. And then as we were talking about resolve of NATO, I can't believe I forgot to point out the ultimate resolve, and that is now Finland is a member of NATO. Now Sweden is a member of NATO. Who would ever imagine 200 years of neutrality? But I think they were inspired too by the Baltic Republic. So working together, I'm just so encouraged of what can be done. But putting that together too, what more can we do to advance the capabilities of our Baltic allies in terms of technology such as drone technology and counter-drone technology?
Thank you. Really, the Winter War you mentioned that Finnish people fought. Actually, this is something we as Estonians we are following, and also this is our mistake that our democracy didn't work so well in 1939, but it worked better in Finland because Finnish people had an opportunity to decide, and then they started to fight back. Estonians, I think, we were ready at the time, but finally there was an agreement, and then it was too late. But also we fought our freedom in 1918 to 20, and we were actually victorious against the Soviet Russia at this time. But what we can do, of course, the understanding that we are doing our part, but U.S. Presence militarily in our region is very important, and this decision has been made right now that U.S. troops will remain in the Baltic states and Poland. Any messages that the U.S. is withdrawing troops from Europe is a bad thing, because Russia definitely will use it. I'm not talking only about the military capabilities, but I'm talking as well the messages to our people, to European people, because Russia and Putin will definitely use that as a sign that the U.S. is weak and withdrawing the troops because of them, because of Putin. And this is a very, very wrong way to go. As well, on practical level, it is very important and very grateful for the Congress support for the Baltic Security Initiative. As I mentioned before, these are practical things. But as well to understand the main principle that aggressive Russia is not a problem for Ukraine only. Aggressive Russia is a problem for all of us. And we are ready to do our part. We are ready to stand there. We are ready to as well to support Ukraine. And also, what is the clear thing is about security guarantees for the future. If the just and lasting peace will come, we in Europe must understand, and I think that we are ready, that we must put the skin in the game to secure Ukraine, to give the relevant security guarantees, not the guarantees which are written on the paper and which are not costing anything in the near future, as it happened with the Minsk agreements. Of course, Estonian position is clear that we cannot take down the opportunity for Ukraine in the future to join the NATO, because this is the most efficient security guarantee. But as well, we as a bordering country of Russia, maybe a good example that if the coalition of the willing will go and decide together with Ukraine that security guarantees needs boots on the ground, we decided this March, as an Estonian government, we will be part and participating boots on the ground military capabilities, even we are the neighboring country of Russia, if there is need for that. Because if we give the solid security guarantees for Ukraine, then these guarantees are for Europe as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, Director Rao, I appreciate you bringing up about Burgas. That is, I want to know more about that. But you also identified, indeed, the political composition, sadly, of the Russian Federation is fascism. It's fascism with a combination of mafia. As I told you, I had wonderful visits to Russia, and I It's heartbreaking to me to see a country that could have had such opportunity now have an economy smaller than Italy, and then to find out it's smaller than the Baltic republics and Poland together. Over and over again, what could be a great country, but putting that in mind, there's also good news, and that is about Margus, and then indeed the incredible opportunities that President Trump has achieved for the Black Sea region and Caucasus with Azerbaijan and Armenia. But a tragedy truly is the rigged elections in the Republic of Georgia. What do you recommend that can be done with the Georgian Dream dictatorship, which is now working very closely with the Chinese Communist Party to give away the only Black Sea port that Georgia has to the Chinese Communist Party, which facilitates their ability to impact the importation of rare earths and the liberation and the economic progress of Central Asia?
We're told that the minister has to leave in about 5 minutes, so we want to be mindful of his time. But thank you, Representative Wilson, for mentioning the steadfast, brave people of the Republic of Georgia who've stood out in the cold and in the summer heat for 1 full year protesting the illegal and rigged election, which has been recognized as such by the European Union and by a number of Americans. So who would like to respond about that particular issue?
About Georgia?
Yes.
I was in Georgia just a year ago or a bit more, and I was there together with Baltic foreign ministers and Iceland foreign minister at this time. It was before the elections happened. And I saw as well, Mr. Chairman, the great willingness of Georgian people. And they believed at this time that actually the leadership is keeping the promises about the integration to the western part of the world and European Union and so on. But it was heavily violated. And also, we are very close to Georgian people. We have been very supportive all the decades about reforms. And what we see now, I don't call this government as a government, but this is a regime which is not following the Georgian people will. And what we see now is the beginning of the same developments what we saw years ago in Belarusia. So this is very dangerous thing. This is very dangerous thing, and Estonian people, I can say you, will continue to support Georgian people's will for freedom. Thank you.
And Mr. Cohen says he can limit his remarks to 2 minutes. Can you stay that long?
Thank you, sir. Just a little history lesson, if you don't mind, Mr. Minister. I believe you said something.
We have time.
I believe you said something about Russia taking all the children in Estonia during the 39-40 period. Is that accurate? Did I hear that right?
I was talking about Ukraine children.
Okay, well, I know about Ukraine children, so I misunderstood you then.
Okay.
I thought you said they took, the population in Estonia was not as great because they took all the kids.
No. The problem was that the end of 30s, our parliament was run out of these democratical rules, and we had very good president at the time who wanted the best for the nation, but we had no democratic system as it was in Finland to respond these proposals, so-called, from Russian side, Soviet side. So the Finnish people decided to fight. And Estonian people, we had no this democratical system.
I got you. I just misunderstood what you said. Yeah. I wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
We're going to conclude the hearing. We want to very much thank our witnesses, particularly you, Mr. Minister, and the representatives also of the think tanks that we rely so much on hearing the ground truth. Also, thank you to our audience, who've been very patient and attentive and have filled this room with supporters of what you believe in, Mr. Minister. And I can assure you that the words that have been spoken today by our 3 witnesses will reverberate around Europe and be heard worldwide. So thank you very much. And with that, we conclude the hearing.